Okay, good afternoon and happy Sabbath. Uh, my name is Salvador Gomez, and we will continue our study on the sealing of the 144,000. To begin our study, we're going to look at these four different points that we were able to discover in this study. Number one, at the termination of the prophetic periods, i.e., the 6,000 years, the seven times of the Gentiles, or the 2520, and the 2,300 prophetic years, they all ended in October 22nd, 1844, which was um, the Great Disappointment. God began to gather and seal his people under the investigative time of judgment. And that is also called, under the feast of the Old Testament, the Day of Atonement. This was the fulfillment of that time. Number two, the fulfillment of Revelation 7, verse 1 is marked out as the revolution that burst out and died out unexpectedly in 1848. This date also marks the beginning of the little time of trouble. And we also saw that this little time of trouble will continue all the way until the uh, big time of trouble, Jacob's time of trouble, um, and that's when the seven last plagues begin. We also saw number three, the first to be mentioned after her passing, as being sealed and numbered among the 144,000 as a result of the third angel's message, was Elvira Hastings. And this was written down in the year 1850. Number four, that the fourth commandment, the seventh day Sabbath, which contains the name of God, is the seal of God. Therefore, the sealing of the 144,000 is the Sabbath reformation from the time that the message was given in 1844 until the general close of probation. So far, is that pretty clear? Is that understandable? I want to make sure we're on the same page, right? Okay, and so let's continue. These are the points that we're going to look at today. Okay, these following points. Number one, and it's not chronological, it's not in order. These are just the things that we will be able to study today by God's grace. Number one is the number 144,000 found in Revelation chapter 7, of course, a definite or literal number, or indefinite, which would be a symbolic number. Okay. Number two, what is meant by the sealing of the 12 tribes of Israel, right? Number three, who are sealed. Number four, will there then be only 144,000 saved from among the living when the Lord appears? In other words, is it only going to be 144,000, or will there be more? Okay. Number five. And lastly, do the 144,000 represent only those who have never passed through death? Okay, and so before we begin, we hope to be able to cover all of these points today. More than likely, we won't, and that's okay. We'll go ahead and stop at a certain time. We don't want to burden our minds or make it too complex for us to remember. So we're gonna end up breaking it down into parts, okay? But before we get into those points, we're going to look at 4 verses in the Old Testament that speak about 4 reform movements. These 4 reform movements we've studied already, okay? We've studied them, but we haven't seen them in these verses. And they are found in the book of Isaiah in the Old Testament, chapter 58, verse 11. And here's the first verse, and we're going to break it down, okay? It says, Isaiah 58, verse 11, and the Lord, notice the word Lord is all caps. We know that this must be referring to the Father God, yes. It says, and the Lord shall guide thee continually and satisfy thy soul in drought. Okay. So the Lord shall guide thee continually and satisfy thy soul in drought and make fat thy bones, and thou shalt be like a watered garden. And so by the words being employed here, we know that this uh, drought and making fat thy bones, it says, and thou shalt be like. So when that word is being used, be like, we know that this must be speaking in a figurative language, right? To be like, right? Because nobody here has a river of water running through them, unless we're talking about our blood system, right? But this must refer in a spiritual sense. This must refer in a symbolic sense, okay? So notice there is a satisfying of the soul in drought. Okay, so we're going to see what that is. And this is speaking of a movement, as I had mentioned, and make fat thy bones, and thou shalt be like a watered garden, and like a spring of water whose waters fail not. Okay, and so the idea that God is giving us here, that there would be a time when there would be a drought, okay, a spiritual drought. And throughout that drought, God would supply these waters. God would supply these waters. Is everybody on the same page there? Okay, let's continue. Revelation chapter 11, verse 3, 3 and 4, and then we're going to jump to verse 6, speaks of that time. Notice what it says. It said, and I will give power unto my 2 witnesses. And we're going to see what those, I'm going to tell you, without having to go into too much detail. Later, at a later time, we could study Revelation chapter 11 and look at these things in detail. But we're going to see what these 2 witnesses are, or who they are. And they shall prophesy 1,260 days. Does everybody remember this time period? Yes, no? The 1,260 years of papal persecution. Okay. And this is why it says that throughout this time period, they're clothed, the 2 witnesses are clothed in sackcloth, right? That sackcloth means it's a dark period. It's a time of gloominess and darkness, spiritual darkness. The 2 witnesses here, yes, you are correct. We're going to see here on verse 4, these are the 2 olive trees and the 2 candlesticks standing before the God of the earth. If we compare this to the book of Zechariah, we see there the same analogy. And we see that there's oil coming out of these 2 olive trees. We know that the oil is used for the lamp, and we know that the Bible tells us that the lamp is the word of God, which gives light to our path, correct? And so this is speaking about the Old and New Testament. the Old and the New Testament. These are the two witnesses. And it says we just read that these two witnesses would prophesy for how long? 1,260 years, and they would be clothed in sackcloth, which means that there would be a time of darkness. That time of darkness is also a time of drought. Are we seeing that here? Yeah. Okay, let's continue. It says, these have power to shut heaven, that it rain not in the days of their prophecy. And so this is letting us know that throughout this time period, that for some, the word would be hidden.
Yeah.
Not everybody would have access, right? Was not the Bible chained to the monasteries and only made available to those in clergy under the Roman papal church, right? It wasn't available to the common people. It wouldn't have been available to us if we were living at that time. And so therefore we see that there is a drought. But it says that in that drought there would be some that would receive water, the word.
There was some.
And there was some, right?
Yeah.
And that's why it says, God shall satisfy thee, thy soul in drought.
That's them. That's
Right?
the ones that were.
That's correct. That is the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation. Notice verse 11, or yeah, because we just read that there would be no rain, right? Okay. But let me finish. It said, and have power over waters to turn them to blood, okay, and smite the earth with all plagues as often as they will. And so those that fight against the word of God would have judgment fall upon them. Is that right? We see this in Egypt. Remember, in the turning of water to blood, and then we also saw that Elijah, through the word of God, was able to shut the heavens, that it would rain not for how long? 3.5 years, or 3.5 years, and we'll see that that's a figure of the 1,260 days, time, times, and half a time. Amos chapter 8, verses 11 through 13, it says, and behold, the days come, saith the Lord God. Notice God in caps. It's the same God that we just read from in Isaiah. That I will send a famine in the land. So what's a famine? A drought. It's another way of saying a drought. Not a famine of bread, nor a thirst for water. So this is not a literal, right? It says this is not a literal, but of hearing the words of the Lord. And so this text confirms everything that we just mentioned in the prior verses. Okay. It says, but of hearing the words of the Lord. Again, the caps. Notice every time it has the caps because that's speaking of the Father. And they shall wander from sea to sea. That there's this time is not now, or it wasn't in the past. This is going to be future. Okay, but we're using this verse to interpret everything that we just mentioned in the prior verses. Okay, so this time right here, that's gonna happen in the future, namely the 7 last plagues, when probation closes. It says that they shall wander from sea to sea, and from the north even to the east. They shall run to and fro to seek the word of the Lord, and shall not find it. Why won't they find it at that time?
Probation is closed.
Probation is closed. There will be no need to evangelize during that time. Once probation closes, all cases are done. are finalized, the next event that we see is under the seventh last plague, Jesus Christ returns. Okay, so this is why there's no this is why this famine takes place under the seven last plagues. But notice what it continues to say, just to make it even clearer. Verse 13, in that day shall the fair virgins and young men faint for thirst. Right? This is that drought, that spiritual drought that will be coming at the seven last plagues. And so we've discovered with this verse right here, Isaiah 58:11, that during the Reformation, during this drought under the Protestant Reformation, God would supply them waters, right? Now let's notice the next verse right here. Okay, this is still connected to the drought. It says, in what sense have these witnesses power to shut heaven, turn waters to blood, and bring plagues on the earth? Elijah shut heaven that it rained not for 3 years and a half. But he did it by the word of the Lord. Moses, by the word of God, of the Lord, turned the waters of Egypt to blood. And just as these judgments recorded in their testimony have been fulfilled, so will every threatening and judgment denounced by them against any people surely be accomplished, as often as they will. As often as judgments are recorded on their pages to take place, so often they will come to pass. And an instance of this the world is yet to experience in the infliction of the seven last plagues. Okay, and so just as surely as Moses denounced the judgment upon Egypt, just as surely as Elijah denounced the judgment upon rebellious Israel, that there would be no rain for 3.5 years, that's as sure as those calamities that will come throughout this time period of the little time of trouble, all the way down to the seven last plagues. That's how sure those judgments will be in being fulfilled. Isaiah 58:12. Notice what it says. And they that shall be of thee. Okay, so speaking of those Protestant reformers, and they that shall be of thee shall build the old waste places. Thou shalt raise up the foundations of many generations, and thou shalt be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of paths to dwell in. Okay, and so here is the next movement. Those that came out of the Protestant Reformation, it says of them that they would raise up the foundations. It says of them that they would shall be called the repairer of the breach and the restorer of past dwelling. Notice in reference to this church, it is also mentioned in Revelation chapter 3 as the church of Sardis. Notice what it says of them. Remember, therefore, how thou hast received and heard, and hold fast and repent. If therefore thou shalt not watch, I will come unto thee as a thief, and thou shalt not know what hour I will come upon thee. And so we know this is in reference to the churches that were established here in North America, because it was to them that was given a particular message and a particular movement. Notice what it says. This the period covered by the church of Sardis, that which remains is what that's what the meaning of the name is, that which remains from 1798 down to the Great Advent Movement in 1844, which is the church age to follow, called Philadelphia or brotherly love. By our studies of the first and second angel's message, we found that many in this time period, Christ did come as a thief for not watching unto prayer. Isn't that true? There were many that rejected the second advent of Christ. Many rejected the first and second angel's message, correct? And so here we have being mentioned here in Isaiah 58:12 that those that came out of those churches in 1844 were those that uh, built or yes, that built the old waste places, those that shall raise up the foundations of many generations. And we forgot to put the chart up, but we remember, we recall that we've been studying the very foundations of Adventism. That's who it is referring to here in verse 12. Okay? Notice Revelation 3:4 now. Thou hast a few names even in Sardis, which have not defiled their garments, and they shall walk with me in white, for they are worthy. Notice what Daniel in the Revelation says, page 364. This church was to hear the proclamation of the doctrine of the second advent. As we learn from verse 3, if therefore thou shalt not watch, I will come on thee as a thief. This implies that the doctrine of the Advent would be proclaimed, and the duty of watching be enjoined upon the church. The coming spoken of is unconditional. Do we understand what that means? That means that regardless of whatever would be the situation, the coming was unconditional. It was going to come, and that nothing could withhold that coming. The manner only in which it would come upon them is conditional. That's where the conditional part is implied. Their not watching would not prevent the coming of the Lord, but by watching they could avoid being overtaken as by a thief. It is only to those who are in this condition that the day of the Lord comes unawares. Ye brethren, says Paul, are not in darkness, that that day should overtake you as a thief. 1 Thessalonians 5:4. Okay, and so here we have the second movement, but we also see that there is a one connected to this one, where it says the repairer of the breach, and we're gonna look at that now. Who are the repairer of the breach, according to what we have been studying? Here we have the answer. If thou, verse 13, if thou turn away thy foot from the Sabbath, from doing thy pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy of the Lord, honorable, and shall honor him, not doing thine own ways, nor finding thine own pleasure, nor speaking thine own words. And so the repairers of the breach are those that repaired the breach in God's law. Do you remember we studied this? Remember, it was Constantine that was the first to make a national Sunday law, and by doing so, he made this breach. And so here we have the third angel. After 1844, the restoring of the seal, the restoring of the fourth commandment, the Sabbath. This verse right here actually gives us exact instruction as to how we keep the Sabbath. Are we able to see that? Again, it says, if thou turn away thy foot from the Sabbath, from doing thy pleasure, stop doing what I want to do on that day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy of the Lord, honorable, and shall honor him. How do we honor him? Not doing thine own ways, nor finding thine own pleasure, not even speaking our own words. And the only way this can be done is, as we have seen in the prophecies of Jeremiah, and also Paul mentions it too, is when God writes his law in our hearts. This is the sealing message. It says here, repairing the breach in the law of God. Isaiah 58:14. And this would be the result of those that would be sealed with this law. Isaiah 58:14. Then shalt thou delight thyself in the Lord. This is when we will find pleasure in keeping the law.
That's right.
And when we're sealed, and I will cause thee to ride upon the high places of the earth, and feed thee with the heritage of Jacob thy father, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken it. Okay, and so notice here that the heritage of Jacob belongs to those that are to pass through Jacob's great time of trouble, the 144,000. Those that receive this heritage must pass through Jacob's time of trouble. And notice, those that are sealed by keeping the Sabbath day as it should be done. So let's go over it. Number one, satisfy thy soul in drought. This was the Great Reformation through the Dark Ages from 538 all the way down to 1798. That's the 1260 of the Christian era. Number two, and they that shall be of thee that build the old waste places, thou shalt raise up the foundations of many generations, and thou shalt be called. This is talking about the Great Advent movement. The Great Awakening was that movement that came out of the Reformed churches, which were Babylon. This was the movement that raised up the foundations of many generations. This was the movement found in Revelation chapter 14, verses 6 through 8, under the first and second angel's message. Now we have part B, the repairer of the breach, the restorer of paths to dwell in. As we have seen thus far, the only movement that God ever used to repair the breach and to restore his law is that of the third angel of Revelation 14, 9 through 13. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and have the faith of Jesus. The following verse in Isaiah tells us exactly what needs to be restored in the breach. This is what did begin to take place after the great disappointment of October 22nd, 1844. And here's the verse again. Isaiah 58:13. If thou turn away thy foot from the Sabbath, from doing thy pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy of the Lord honorable, and shall honor him, not doing thine own pleasure, nor finding thine own pleasure, nor speaking thine own words. This is a total submission of our lives to God and his Son. Hopefully that was uh, a little ray of light for us, so to see those verses and to see the movements within those verses. Just a little introduction to our continued study. Now we will get into the main topic. Notice most of this is taken from Uriah Smith, from different articles. And so take note. It says here, numerous queries have been received of late concerning the 144,000 brought to view in Revelation 7. Who are they? At what age of the world are they developed? Is the number to be taken in a strictly literal sense, or is it a representative number, meaning a larger and indefinite company of some particular class? Some of these things in this quotation we've already looked at. Uh, some of them we haven't, namely the is it literal or is it symbolic? Is it a larger and indefinite company, or is it a particular class? We will be seeing that here in these slides. Okay, notice the 140, the number 144,000 must mean a definite number composed of just so many individuals. It cannot stand for a larger but indefinite number, for in verse 9, another company is introduced which is indefinite in its proportion, and hence is spoken of as a great multitude which no man can number. If the 144,000 were designed to represent such an indefinite number, when John would have said in verse 4, and there were sealed a great multitude which no man can number, out of all the tribes of the children of Israel. But instead of this, he says 144,000, 12,000 from each tribe, a number which can be easily enumerated. Okay, and so right here, the answer is that it is a literal, definite number. Okay, we know this because it's giving us the number. Anytime we see a number, we know that we can count it, right? Yet the great multitude that cannot be numbered is the indefinite number. That's a number that we as human beings will not be able to count. And this is why they have that title. This is why they're called the great multitude, which cannot be numbered, innumerable. See,
It makes no sense to have both.
it makes no sense to have both as one, right? As one.
If it was just one.
If it was just one. And so here, there's wisdom. We see that he's able to distinguish between both. We should be able to do the same. Yeah, I know. And majority, the majority of Adventists today are not able to see it.
Kind of say him because he kind of represents everybody else.
He
He's
does.
like above everybody.
He does, yes.
He's like their pastor.
He is the main proponent of that.
The English.
Yeah. The reason for this distinction is apparent if we take the innumerable multitude of verse 9 to be the whole host of the redeemed, who will have part in the first resurrection. And so the great multitude is resurrected when? Under the general resurrection, right?
Yeah.
When Christ comes, Christ resurrects them. They take part in that resurrection. And the 144,000 to be Christians who will be alive on the earth when Christ appears. And so the difference between the two is that those in the great multitude, they come up when Christ returns.
Yes.
Right? They're dead when Christ comes. The 144,000 are alive, all of them alive. The 140, we're talking.
Like
Oh, we're gonna talk about that. We're gonna get there. Okay,
In order for them to be alive, they're gonna have to.
we're getting there. Okay, so that question is gonna be answered. Pay attention, okay, and we're gonna make sure that it's clear in our minds. We have to be able to understand this. Okay, by God's grace, of course. It says, and the 144,000 to be Christians who will be alive on the earth when Christ appears. And the 144,000 are the ones who will be thus alive and meet Christ at his second coming. Appears from the prophecy where they are next mentioned, that is Revelation 14, 1 through 5. And we looked at this, remember? This is where it talks about on Mount Zion, John saw the 144,000 with Jesus, the Lamb. Okay. Here they are represented as coming triumphant out of the last religious conflict in the world. Revelation 13. This is speaking about the mark of the beast, right? Verses 12 through 18, as being redeemed from the earth. And so, in other words, they're being redeemed among people on the earth. They are on the earth alive when this happens. Redeemed from the earth and redeemed among men. Okay, is that clear? So in other words, they will have to be alive at this time in order for them to compose the 144,000. Will there then be only, okay, and so here's another question that we're answering. We've already answered that it is a literal number, okay, of so many individuals, and we're still going to look at some more parts of it, but here's the second part. Will there be only 144,000 saved from among the living when the Lord appears? May not this number be so far representative as to include many others? So in other words, with the 144,000, will there be others, just like you just asked, right? Okay. Will there be others that are saved with this company? Notice there seems to be quite a plausible supposition that this latter may be the case. In other words, that there will be others that will be in this company. So in other words, it's not only 144,000, okay? But the point that we're going to see here is that how God counts. How does God count or enumerate individuals? How do we find that in the Bible? So notice what it continues to say. That is, that the 144,000 may include only the adult males connected with the Great Advent movement, while the women and children associated in the same movement would be so many additional ones to be saved, from among the living in that day. Okay, so the ones that God counts are those males that are connected with first, second, and third angel's message. Those that give this message, those that are revealed in this message, the males are the ones that God counts or enumerates, right? The males. But in connection with them, we have women and children. Those that are connected to the males, the families of the males are also in the company. Does that make sense? Even though God doesn't count them, they are there, included in the company. In the company. Okay. So in other words, if there are other families involved with those males in the 144,000, then we would right, instead of the 144,000, it would be 700,000. So far, we're clear on that? Okay. Let's see how he explains this now. Again, this is Uriah Smith. The plausibility of this idea lies in the fact that the Hebrews were so numbered when delivered from Egyptian bondage, which was a figure of the deliverance of the remnant of the true Israel from the Egypt of this world. Of this world at the coming of the Lord. Okay, and so just like the Hebrews were delivered from Egyptian bondage, they were, once they came out of Egypt, God did what? He enumerated them, he counted them, and the only ones he counted were the males, those 18 years of age and older, because they were able to go to war. See? And so just like God numbered the males only, but there were other people there, women and children. Okay. Same, the figure is that this happened to the ancient Hebrews, the which is a figure of what would happen at the end of time. And so here we have the 144,000, which is the antitype. This is the true meaning, okay? Or the fulfilled meaning. Some 3 millions in all came out from of Egypt, yet there were numbered only those who were able to go forth in war from 20 years. Excuse me, I said 18. It says 20 years old and upward, amounting in all to 603, 550. 550. Okay. This is found in Numbers chapter 1, 2, 3, and 46. Okay, so notice here's another point. But says 1, the 144,000 cannot belong to the present generation or be gathered in the gospel dispensation, for they were sealed out of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. And so, just so we're clear on this question, the objection here is that it says that they're sealed out of the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay, out of the 12 tribes of Israel. And so that is giving them the thought that, well, who are the 12 out tribes of Israel? Aren't they the carnal Jews? Notice what it says. A sufficient answer to this is found in the testimony of James. He is writing AD 60 to Christians and for the benefit of Christians, and carrying us down even to the coming of Christ. Addresses his epistle to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. Okay, and so in the book of James, when he salutes God's people, the Christians, the Christian believers of the time, he says to the 12 tribes of Israel scattered abroad. Okay, this is AD 60, right? Was Israel existing at that time? We're talking about the literal Israel. You don't remember, right? Okay, so remember we studied the 2,300 days. We studied the 70 weeks, and we said that 70 weeks were determined upon God's people, and we noticed that the word determined means cut off, that they had a probationary time, right? That there will come a time that they would no longer be God's people because they crucified the Messiah. Remember that? Okay. When did this happen? In the middle of the week, when they crucified Jesus Christ, right? AD 31. From that point forward, the disciples, the apostles, begin to speak to who? To the Gentiles. Okay. And so now it is no longer a literal Israel, it is a spiritual. Because now it matters not if you're a Jew.
We got grafted in.
We got grafted in. Very good answer. Look at this. He's gonna explain it now, okay? I just wanted to bring your mind back to the prophecy that we studied, so that way we can remember that it's no longer the carnal Jew. The people in Israel are not the real Jews. Those are the fake Jews, the Gentile. Call them Gentiles now. Okay, because they also need to be converted. Notice what it says. Speaking of those that were mentioned by James and scattered abroad, it says it is evident. And remember what the scattering is? Do you remember? The scattering? There would be a gathering, right? And so the 25-20, the 7 times of the Gentiles, we saw that all that time period, they would be scattered for 25-20 years, right? And so this is why James in 60 AD is still mentioning them as being scattered, because they were still living in the scattering time. Who was the power scattering at that time? Pagan Rome, right? Okay, so that kind of helps us come back to see in what part of the history we're speaking of, right? Okay, it says it is evident, therefore, that Christians are counted as belonging to the 12 tribes. With that verse, that lets us know that Christians belong to the 12 tribes. And so when we see in Revelation chapter 7 referring to the 12 tribes, it can't be referring to the nation, the literal nation of Israel. It must be referring to the one that James is talking about. It must be talking about the Christians. It must be talking about the Gentiles that were grafted in. Because it is no longer the nation of Israel, the literal nation of Israel is no longer God's people. It is those that accepted Christ from that point forward. Okay? It is no longer the carnal Jew, according to what we just read. In what sense are they so considered? Notice, for there are no genealogies of the tribes preserved among men in this present dispensation. And so what that means is that we don't have a family tree. We don't have any writings of the Jews, the spiritual Jew. We don't have any way of knowing who is a spiritual Jew. We don't have anything written down saying this person was of, this family member of this family member of this family member, and that's how they kept the genealogy of Jesus, right? But there was a purpose for it, and we're going to see what that purpose was. Okay, the only genealogy of those that accept Christ is written somewhere else. You know where it's written? In heaven, right? So God has that genealogy. God is the only one that's able to see that, right? And there's a purpose for it, because we're living in what? The time of the judgment. That's the reason why that God needs that writing, because there's a judgment going on. Okay. Paul illustrates this by a beautiful figure in the 11th chapter of Romans. He sets forth the people of God in the former dispensation, the literal Israel, under the figure of the knowledge tree with the 12 branches. These branches represented the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. These branches were broken off. Which branches? That's correct. Yes. Those branches that represented the 12 tribes of the children of Israel, it says these branches were broken off, which signified that the Jews, by rejecting Christ, ceased to be God's people. Okay? And so if they cease to be God's people, then the Israel of today is a spiritual Israel, is not a literal nation here on earth.
It's people like us.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
included.
No more special.
But he continues to explain. It says, the Gentiles who accepted Christ were taken by the Lord as his people. Who?
The Gentiles.
The Gentiles who accepted Christ were taken by the Lord as his people. And Paul represents this movement by branches of a olive, wild olive, grafted into the same, where the natural branches, the Jews, were broken off. There, the wild olive, the Gentiles, were grafted in. So, right where those 12 branches were broken,
We got
God grafted us, the Gentiles, in. Okay, right where they were broken. Okay, so just imagine this. This represents the Jews. So this is broken. Now God grafts us in, and whatever grows from there is no longer Jew or literal Jew. It is the spiritual Jew. Okay, is it pretty clear in our minds? I know it can be difficult, a little bit, because we're not used to this. We have always thought that the people over there in the east, in Jerusalem, are still God's people. But that's a great deception, because the Bible, it tells us very clearly, as we will see, that those are not God's people. No. Their time under the prophecy of the 70 weeks was finished. When they rejected Christ, those branches were broken off, and then we, the Gentiles, are grafted in.
Amen.
Now, how did this affect the tree? There were at first 12 branches, representing the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. And after they were broken off and grafts were inserted from the Gentiles or Christians, there are still 12 branches or tribes in the household of faith. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
This is why there's still 12 tribes, because the branches were 12 and we're grafted in instead of the carnal Jew. All right? These are not the literal seed, but the spiritual, because they, the Jews, are not brought in by faith, right? Because they were carnal. It had to do with their genealogy, had to do of their bloodline, right? This is not so with the Christian. This deals with faith. This deals with your belief in Christ. Okay. It says, so we hear Paul saying in Romans 2, verse 28 and 29, he is not a Jew, which is one outwardly, neither is that of circumcision. And remember, this was the Old Testament rite that every male had to do what? Be circumcised. That was a sign of their allegiance to God. That showed who they served, right? It has nothing to do with circumcision anymore. How many of us males here had to do that? None of us. It says, and circumcision is that of the heart in the spirit, not of the letter. Again, Paul says, Romans 9, 6 through 8, they are not all Israel which are of Israel. Okay. So just because your nationality is of Israel does not mean that you're from Israel. That's pretty plain language. Neither because they are of the seed of Abraham are they all children. But in Isaac shall thy seed be called. That is, they which are the children of the flesh. These are not the children of God, but the children of the promise are counted for seed, because the children of the promise is of faith. That deals with your belief rather than your bloodline. And he adds in Galatians 4:28 that we, brethren, Christians, as Isaac was, are the children of promise. And he adds in the next verse that he was born after the Spirit. Okay, who was born after the Spirit? Isaac. Isaac. Well, that's where we come from, right? He was the child of faith, was he not? Didn't they have to have faith that God was going to give them Isaac? Yes, that's who we are. We come from him, from faith. Continues to say, nothing could be plainer than these testimonies. Is that right? Is that pretty plain in our minds? Are we settled on that? Because we need to be. Okay. Nothing could be plainer than these testimonies that there is a spiritual seed reckoned as the true Israel. We're talking about spiritual Israel, perpetrated not in not in a literal, but in a spiritual sense. No genealogy is kept of those tribes here upon earth. Speaking of the tribes of Israel today, spiritual Israel, as it is not necessary that men should know or understand these distinctions. But Paul speaks of the church of the firstborn written in heaven, giving us to understand that the record is kept there. The only object of preserving the tribes distinct, speaking of the Old Testament church, the old Israel, the only object of preserving the tribes distinct in the former dispensation was that men might understand the fulfillment of the prophecies concerning Christ. Isn't that right? This is how the Jews were to understand how Christ would come. This is why he's also called the son of David, right? Because he was going to come through Judah. He was going to come through that bloodline, that genealogy. This is how they were to understand it. Okay. It says, who was to spring from a particular tribe, and the Jews might thus be able to identify the Messiah. But since Christ has come, that necessity no longer exists, right? We no longer are looking for a Messiah. Therefore, that genealogy is no longer needed. We no longer have to look at what tribes we come from. And hence the genealogy of the tribes has been irrecoverably lost. Right? We have no record of those genealogies.
Really don't need to have.
We don't need them. But that last part is speaking about the literal Jew, right? We don't have records of those after Christ's coming because it's not, doesn't help us. It's not necessary. That dispensation is gone and lost forever. And lastly, here's the next question. And lastly, do the 144,000 represent only those who have never passed through death? Right? That was part of Jose's question. Is it only people that are alive, or could they have, like you said, Alan White, these other pioneers, right? Are they gonna be in that number? Let's notice.
I think so.
You think it's okay? I think you have good thoughts. I think that God is leading those thoughts. Notice what Uriah Smith says or has written down. It says, and lastly, do the 144,000 represent only those who have never passed through death? Not at all. Okay. And so this idea that the 144,000 can never die is false. Can never die. That's what many people preach today. That's what many people understand today, that they must be alive all the way till Christ comes. That's the only way to be a part of this number. Okay. Huh?
That's one.
No, no. I think we both came to the same understanding around the same time on this.
I heard this from Linda. I heard that.
You've heard it before?
One of the posts.
The church that I belong to in Delano, they believed it. They believe that you have to be alive all the way till Christ comes. Yeah. Yeah.
And that only 144,000 were gonna be alive.
Yeah, and that they could never die. Okay, that was part of the requirement. Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's the only ones that are gonna be alive. They're gonna be alive, but they're gonna be resurrected, right?
Maybe.
We're getting there. Yeah, you're on the right track. Okay, so not at all. And notice the logic. Notice his explanation of this, his understanding of this, and he wasn't the only one that understood this. We have testimonies from others. J.N. Lofbro, James White, they also believed and taught this. This was the teaching of the third angel's message as they gave it, as they understood it, as God enlightened them with it. Notice what he says. The conditions of the prophecy make it necessary that many who are now in their grave should be included in the 144,000. The prophecy itself of the 144,000, Revelation 14, Revelation chapter 7, makes it necessary that those that gave this message, those that were there in the beginning of this message, have to be included. That there is no way around it. Does that make sense? The third message of Revelation 14 is the sealing message of Revelation 7. In Revelation 14, again, we see the group, the 144,000 on Mount Zion with the Lamb. Just a few verses later, then we see the message that the 144,000 must give. The first, second, and third angel's message. Okay? This makes it necessary that they who were there in the fulfillment of those prophecies, of those visions, that they should be part of this number. Is that pretty plain and simple to understand?
Yeah.
Right? How is it so though? Let's look at this. Though in different chapters and represented under different circumstances, they are not two messages, but one and the same thing. Okay, so Revelation 14, Revelation chapter 7, even though they're separate chapters, they're actually one and the same thing. Same message.
Kind of like the first and second angel message.
Kind of like the first angel. Yes, you're correct on that. But here we are under the third angel, and we have two different chapters, but they both speak about the same thing. Okay. The third message will therefore result in fitting the 144,000. Okay, so the third angel fits the 144,000. It prepares them, okay, for the coming of the Lord. This is called in Revelation chapter 7, sealing them with the seal of the living God in their forehead. The seal of God being the Sabbath. The work brought to view is the message which involves the Sabbath reform movement of these days. Okay? Of these days. Is it pretty clear?
Yeah.
That they are one and the same message? And since it is one and the same message, those that give this message should be included in that number. Then, all those who have a genuine, notice the word genuine, okay? All those who have a genuine religious experience terminating in this movement must, of course, be included in the number of those who are sealed by the message. Okay? Those that have an experience in the fulfillment of this movement under the third angel's message must, of course, be included in the number of those who are sealed by the message. Their connection with the message results in their being sealed, and being sealed results in their salvation.
In the heart.
Of course, yes. This is the prophecy that of the sealing of binding the law among his disciples. Now, there are many who are in their graves, right? How many of the pioneers are living today? They all passed, right? They're all passed, okay? Who will be saved, whose whole religious experience from a state of sin to full acceptance with God has been in connection with this message. They will be saved because of this experience, right? Because of this experience, being a part of the third angel's message, being a part of this great and final movement, because of that, they will be saved. Are not such sealed by this message? Question. If they were saved in this message, shouldn't they be sealed? It's one and the same thing. Most assuredly. But the message seals only 144,000. Such must come up from their graves and be counted among. In is the same thing. The 144,000. Okay? And so if you're saved in this message, you are sealed in this message. If you heard this message and you understood the message and you applied the message, a genuine, it says, experience, religious experience, terminating in this movement, must be, of course, included in the number of those who are sealed by the message. See? Okay? Therefore, such must come up from their graves and be counted among the 144,000. How does this happen, right? If they're dead right now, then at what point of time do they come back to life? But it may be said that the time has not yet come when anyone is sealed, and the ones referred to are dead. And how can a dead man, how can dead men be sealed? Right? That's a good question. Since they're dead, how can they be sealed? How can they be a part of this number? Let such ask themselves the question, how can dead men be saved? Here's the answer. They can be sealed in the same way that Daniel, long dead. Is he dead? Is he dead? Okay. He says, long dead, can stand as he did stand in his lot at the end of the 2,300 days. Did Daniel stand in his lot at the end of the 2,300 days? Yes, he did, but yet he's dead, right? So in that sense, in that same sense, just like Daniel stood at that time, it says here, the record of the sealing message message goes upon the books above, right? So God is the one that is writing down who is sealed and who is not, right? It says those whose experience has led them into the message have their names there. If they die in that message, when their names come up in the judgment, they are written among those sealed by the message. It can be no other way. It can be no other way. For in that company, their closing religious experience, and in many cases, their only religious experience, found them. This was their whole religious experience, the third angel's message. Ellen White, James White, Lovebrook, Uriah Smith, Haskell, all of these men, J.N. Andrews, that committed their whole lives, that was the whole part of their ministry was this.
That's why we have to commit ourselves to it.
We must, this is present truth for us. This is why we must go through these books. This is why we must go through these writings. We need to get it from them because they were in the message. They knew what it was. It was truth for their time. And in order for us to understand it, it must come from them. God bless them with this message. Is that pretty plain? As this explains what the voice from heaven commanded John to write. Notice what God told John to write. Okay. Blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth. That is, from the beginning of the third message. Yea, saith the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works do follow them. Okay. So number one, they rest from their labors, and that word rest means that they die. Okay. They rest in their labors, they die, but yet their works, the writings, okay, the books that they published, these works do follow them. Though resting quietly in their graves, they are numbered at last among the 144,000, just the same as if they had lived all the years of their slumbering and passed through all the toils and trials and conflicts which the living have to endure. It's as if they never died. It's as if they never died because their works continue, right? Is it?
And also to help us.
Their writings are for us to help us to understand this message, right? And so it's just as if they never died because one day they will come back to life, okay? And they must come to life, they must be resurrected before Christ comes. Before. We're gonna see that.
So that's literally they're gonna resurrect and they're gonna be there.
And they're gonna be in their mortal state just like we are here.
It's not their, like you're saying, their works. It's not talking about their works.
Oh, their
Like
works,
saying it.
their works continue to, they continue to speak today, right?
Not
Yeah.
by, not by
This-
the act, but by the words means like we're bringing out the message.
The publications,
Yeah, they're-
books, pamphlets, all of these continue to speak, right?
yeah.
As though they are still alive.
Can it be that third, can it mean that though, when it's talking about them being here, when with Christ on the,
That's what I'm understanding. Look, I'll read it again, okay? Notice it says, though resting quietly in their graves, they are right, they're dead, right? Literally, they're dead. They're in their graves. They are numbered at last among the 144,000, just the same as if is the word, right? As if they had lived all the years of their slumbering, like their throughout their time in their graves, is as though they lived all the years of their slumbering and passed through all the toils and trials and conflicts which the living have to endure. Okay? Is as if. How? Through their writings. That's how it is. Now, let's continue. He's gonna continue to explain.
so if the writings get attacked, I mean, if we get attacked and if their writings get attacked too, there's like they're living, their writings are living for the.
And there is something else in regards to what you just said, right? If they attack the writings, who are they attacking?
Them.
Them, but in a more direct way, they're attacking Christ.
Yeah.
Because the message represents Christ. Yeah, it comes from him. Now, this view gives to Revelation 14:13, which we just read, right? It says its wonderful significance, of which it is entirely robbed. Notice that. This view gives Revelation 14:13 its wonderful significance, of which it is entirely robbed. Let me put the underline there, so that way I know where I'm at. Which is entirely robbed by any other position. And so, in other words, there is no other view. There is no other interpretation for this. This is it. Anyone taking away from this is robbing them from this blessing. Okay, this is the blessing that God pronounced upon them. When the voice is heard in heaven, blessed, like it says here, let me read it. Blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth. Right? It's supposed to be a blessing. Right? Yea, said the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors and their works do follow them. That blessing is robbed when we misapply this, when we make it that they must live all the way until Christ comes, that they can never die. That's what that message does. That false message interpretation, correct. Those who deny that those who die under the third message can be numbered among the 144,000 fail to see the connection between that message and Revelation chapter 7, verses 1 through 8. And so if you ask anybody about Revelation chapter 7 and when it was fulfilled, they won't give you a clear answer. They're not going to be able to give it to you as the pioneers gave it to you. Because according to the pioneer view, Ellen White received the vision November 18, 1848, that the sealing message had been given. This was the fulfillment of Revelation chapter 7, verses 1 through 8. See, and this is why I gave you guys, or we went through the review. We looked through the points that we've already looked at, right? Part of this was that in 1848, there was a revolution in France where the winds had been let loose for a moment, right? Unexpectedly, like a volcano we read, right? That is part of pioneer history, 1848. Were you alive at that time? Was I alive at that time? Then the only ones that can give it to us are those that were alive. And who were they? Pioneers.
And they
See?
did.
And they did, yes. That's correct. Notice what he continues to say. Okay. It is urged further that the 144,000 must all be those who have never died because they are redeemed from the earth, right? Redeemed from the earth and redeemed from among men. This is the main objection, right? That they must be alive, okay? Redeemed from among men. But this is no objection. Why? For these very expressions will apply to those who have died in the Lord under this message, as well as to those who never die. Okay? Okay, so in other words,
There's gonna be some that are,
there will be some that never die,
yeah,
but
that's what they're saying.
just because they're dead, that doesn't mean that they won't be with them. And he's gonna explain how this is, okay?
What about what, Elijah?
Elijah? Yeah, the Bible says that he was taken to heaven without dying, right? Okay. Enoch was taken without dying as well, right? Moses, did he go to heaven?
Mm.
But he what happened to him?
Died.
He died.
No, but I'm not.
Yeah.
Sometime.
Right. But so here we have two, right? Two different experiences, you can say. We have like Moses,
Representation.
yeah, two different representations. Moses died and he was resurrected and then went to heaven, right? Okay. And then we have Elijah who never died, right? He didn't die and then he went straight to heaven, right? Enoch as well. But the two classes is Moses and Elijah, right? And so here under the 140, the two classes, Moses died and went to heaven. Elijah does not die. He goes straight to heaven. So here's the two classes under the 144,000. Some will die, be resurrected before Jesus comes. Okay, we're about to read it here. And there will be some that don't die. And we know that the 144,000 do not die from persecution. They don't go through the experience of martyrdom. They're not martyred. God spares their life from that, okay, from martyrdom. And we'll take a look at that at some other point. In this study, I don't think that's something that we're going to touch on, but that's okay. We'll look at it at a different time. Notice what it continues to say. It will be asked how this can be. Okay, so that's the question, right? How is it that these men, these women that were sealed by the third angel will be alive when Jesus comes? And the answer is that they come up in the special resurrection. Okay, so there's a special resurrection. Okay, there's a special resurrection. This is not the general resurrection when Jesus comes. This is a different resurrection. And notice it's in the Bible. We're going to look at it. And the answer is that they come up in a special resurrection, embracing a limited number of both righteous and wicked. And so this is the distinction between the special resurrection and the general resurrection. In the special resurrection, we have two classes resurrecting at the same time: the wicked and the just, or the just and the wicked, however you want to look at it. There's two classes coming up. In the general resurrection, in the first resurrection, is just the just. They come up when Jesus Christ comes, right? But in this class, in the special resurrection, we have two: the just and the wicked. Notice.
The saved and not.
Yes, the saved and the not saved. Okay, and so in other words, there's gonna be from the wicked that come up in this special
It
resurrection,
could be that group that he promised
that they would see him. Yes. Uh-huh. But there would, I just learned from going through this that there's actually with them, with those that pierced him, there will be also uh in under the first and second and third angel's message, those that persecute the message, they come up.
People from modern times.
Think of people from modern times, because they're persecuting him through the message. Okay. But notice, we'll get there. It says, uh embracing a limited number of both righteous and wicked, as mentioned in Daniel 12:2. That's where it mentions the special resurrection, and Revelation 1:7. And so the one in Revelation 1:7 says those that pierced him, right? And every eye shall see him, even those that pierced him. Okay, this is speaking of him when he comes at the second advent. Those in this resurrection come up to everlasting life, speaking of the just, speaking of those that are saved, though not then made immortal. And so, in other words, when they come up, even though they're glorified in that resurrection, that glorified does not mean that they're immortal. That means they come up in their mortal state. Okay. And we're going to see why. Okay. It's important that they're mortal when Jesus comes. Okay. It says, though not made immortal, are those who belong to the 144,000 because they have died in the message. Okay. And so notice this group, they come up at this time under the special resurrection. Okay. And this is during the 7 last plagues, namely the 7th. Okay. Just I'm gonna get ahead of myself a little bit there. In the 7th plague, but Jesus Christ has not yet come. They have to be there alive before before he arrives. It says, those in this resurrection come up to everlasting life. Okay. Though not made immortal, are those who belong to the 144,000 because they have died in the message. And those who rise to shame and contempt are those who had a part in Christ's crucifixion. Notice what it says in the red. And perhaps others in different ages, especially the last, that's our time, who have shown preeminent activity in opposing the work of God. Okay, so those are the two groups that come up. Okay, they come up under this special resurrection. That's how God reunites. He reunites the 144,000 and makes sure that they are alive to receive Jesus, because they must.
Is that just the 144, or is that also including their families?
That's including the families, because they are part of that number. So, for instance, we talked about Elvira Hastings. It says that she was sealed, right? And that she would rest in the time of trouble. That time of trouble that she's resting from is right now, this time period right now. That time, the little time of trouble began in her time, right? All the way down until the 7 last plagues begin. And so that's Ellen White. Now, so the thought was, will she be, because she's not a male, right? Yet we are told that she's in the company. She's gonna be part of the 144,000. And so that means, and she actually says in the quote, if we look at the quote again, it actually says that she would come up at the voice of God. And so if she comes up at the voice of God, that's at this Daniel 12 verse 2. that's in that special resurrection. She will come up at that time. Okay. Along with the rest, children and the males that are actually counted. Okay. And so for now, we're going to pause there in order for us to not get too tired and from all the information that we're receiving here. And so we're not done. We're gonna continue uh not next Sabbath, but the day the following after that. And so this is one of my favorite topics. I hope it's one of yours as well. This is the instruction that we have on the topic straight from our pioneers. And so therefore it is pure doctrine, is pure from the word of God as well. It's the truth. Mhm.
Present truth.
It is the present truth. That's correct. And so hopefully everyone was blessed by it, and we hope to have you here for the following um, part of this series. May God bless you on this Sabbath day, and we hope to see you soon.